Hi, good evening everyone. Welcome to the problem solving session 9 of conservation geography. And in today's session, we will discuss the human population and conservation module. In this module, there were three lectures: population and population growth, part 1, population and population growth, part 2, and human development and sustainable development. So, what I have done in today's session is I have clubbed the first two module or lectures, and I've had the questions after after the end of both the lectures. So I have a set of 20 questions that so I have set of 20 questions here, which is after the end of the first two lectures, and then I have discussed the third lecture, which is human development and sustainable development. So let's start with the first lecture, which is population and population growth, and I will encompass both the first and the second lecture in this part. Okay, so this session or this week's lectures were about human geography. So up until now, all the lectures that we have looked into how Earth was formed, what are the different parts of Earth, how are different biotic organisms spread on the surface of the Earth, and all these different things. We moved on from ocean to plants to roots and soils, and then we also looked into different wildlife. Now we look into humans, and before we understand how human impact the environment and how conservation is important with humans in perspective, we need to first understand how humans are present on Earth. So for that, this module or this week's lectures focus on that part. So we begin with human geography. Now, human geography, so geography is any relationship of, let's say, an organism with its environment. So here also it means the same thing. It's the relationship between human and the physical world around the human. So if you want to formally describe human geography, it studies the relationship between the physical and the human world, as well as it also looks into the spatial distribution of human phenomena, their reasons why they are present in wherever they are present, and the socio-economic differences in different parts of the world. This is important from human perspective because social and economics are two important driving factors for humans. How they are, in which social group they are, what kind of society they are, that determines what kind of culture they have, what kind of ethics they have. And economic drives the major the habitation of human, the occupation of human, and humans contribute to the economics of the country, and then the country economics also affect the human. So there's a lot of factors which are to and fro, means uh, like both of the factors influence each other in equal way. So for human geography, you look into different aspects. So like, for example, this image here summarizes the field very concisely. Human geography encompasses population geography, where you are looking into the different populations and why they are present, where they are present. Political geography, you put into politics as one of the perspective and trying to understand why they are present here. Is it because of the political effects, political scenarios? Then you also try to look cultural. This is what I just said: society and the culture. Behavioral, is it because of a particular type of behavior? Let's say, like a community wants to be together always. So is that driving why they are present, where they are present? Economic and social I've just discussed. And urban. Urban, as we will see in the subsequent slides, it's also very important factor for how human interacts with the physical world. So moving ahead, let's talk about a relationship between humans and the environment and formally describe it. There are two aspects to it. One is naturalization of humans and one is humanization of nature. Now, these terms are easy to interpret just by reading the terms, but when you go to define them, it makes you understand how nuanced it is. So, for example, when you say naturalization of human, it's it means that humans are becoming more of nature oriented. And what does it formally, or how does it translate to geography here? It means that, you know Humans have understood that the surroundings around them or the nature around them has certain limitations, and humans modify their needs according to the nature where they are present. So you are becoming part of the nature, you are becoming more nature oriented, so that human is becoming naturalized. That's naturalization of humans. And that's a way of looking, when you can say that, okay, the human understands the need of the hour, human understands the nature around him. But the opposite is humanization of nature. Now you're making nature humanized. How is that? You are changing your nature according to your own needs. Where do you see that? You want to build a, like you want to earn more money, a company, let's say, and it decides to have a building, or it decides to put up a land for where it can build its own building. It decides to be in a prime location, and the prime location happened to be, on side of a road where actually there's a forest. So what does the company decide? The company decides to clear the land and make up the its building here. That's humanization of nature, because you have now altered the environment. We have read this, we have discussed this a lot of time, but it is in this perspective. When you use the word humanization of nature, you are making it more humanized, you are making it more human oriented. So there are two things when you discuss about humans and the environment. You either naturalize yourself or you humanize the nature around you. Now that brings us to three concepts that are actually there in this relationship. One is environmental determinism, one is possibilism, and one is neo-determinism. Neo-determinism is basically taking on from the other two concepts. The first concept is environmental determinism. As the name, if we break the term, it says environment determines something, right? And what does it determine? It determines how does the human perceive the nature and how does it behave. So what does environmental determinism mean? It means humans there are adapted to and they are dictated by the natural forces. And this is seen in primitive societies. Primitive societies are those which are mainly driven in the rural areas. There, humans understand that the nature around them requires them to do only certain activities, and humans have understood this and adapted themselves to it. Adapted in the sense, so let's say there was a need which required, clearing of forest, or that required cutting trees. They understood the need of the nature, and they adapted it. They said, okay, let's take an alternative route. Let's not cut the trees. Let's do something else. Let's not harm the animals. Let's do something else. So they have adapted, and this is dictated by the natural forces, not just plants, animals, natural forces, as in the entire ecosystem around them. And they respect it, and they have adapted themselves to it. So it's environmentally determined. Now, the other one, the next concept is possibilism. What is that? It's a phenomena of humans changing the environment and this humanizing nature, which begins to have imprints of human endeavor. Of course, we have been discussing so long that the same thing, right? There is human impact on the nature. But what is it trying to say by the word possibilism? It says that earlier, environment was determining how the humans perceive and how the humans behave. But now, humans see a possibility that they can alter the nature. So this is possibilism, right? I want to do something and I can do because I can clear the forest off. I can kill the animal. I can make a way for myself among the forest and reach out to the interior part. So there is possibility of me exploring the nature and I can do what I want to do. So that's possibilism, right? That's not wrong. That's really not wrong that you want to use something from the nature. But what is wrong is going beyond the certain limits. There is a certain threshold that you cannot cross, because if you cross there, the balance is disrupted and that leads to problems. So when you understand this, that brings to the concept of neo-determinism, which is stop and go determinism. It is determinism, but it is not hard. Like, it doesn't mean that you will actually behave exactly what the nature forces you. You can make your own possibilities, but within limits set by the nature. And that's exactly what I have written here on the slide. It's possibilities that are created within the limits set by nature. You know that you can clear forest, but if you keep clearing it rampantly without even giving it time to recover, that's problematic. So that's when you make an informed decision that this is not what I'm supposed to do. So the harm that you are causing to the nature, which is what is the last line of the second point, imprints of human endeavor that you can control. So these are the three concepts that talk about how humans interact with their environment. So moving ahead, now these are the three concepts that determine where humans are present, right? Now, if you come to the actual distribution of humans, this slide here shows how they are present globally. Now you will see that it is not uniform. There are some places which have very few humans, and then there are extreme end which have very high population density. So if the map that you see over here, on the left here, you see a bar, right, which shows that if it is very darkly colored, it means the population density is too high. And if it's very faintly colored, it's almost nil, right? Nil means there is no human habitation there. Now on the map here, you can see the color is everywhere and it's not a constant pattern. You don't see that, okay, if the region is darker colored, the area around it should also be darker colored. It's not the case. So you see here, India has very high colored, which is, of course, it's very densely populated. And then you have Southeast Asians, some part of Asia, and then you have Africa. But then at the very nearby region of India and Africa, you have these very light colored regions, which say that there are less humans in those regions. So this is not uniform because there is no gradation to it. You don't see that, as you move from left to right or right to left or top to bottom, you see a change in this gradation. That's not the case. It's very, it's not uniform at all. It's very patchy distribution. And we will now see why are humans present in different regions in different numbers. So we'll try to figure out different reasons for that were already discussed in the lectures. So now this density term that I just used in the previous slide is basically number of population per unit area, and those unit area is basically any kilometer of a land. So if you have a land, you basically divide it into quadrants and you see in 1 kilometer how many humans are present. That's your population number, that's your population density when you divide it by the number or the kilometer or the land size. And now let's talk about the factors which actually determine why do you have such disparity in the distribution. And mainly they are driven by geographical factors, economical factors, and social cultural factors. Every time you talk about human, social or cultural factors play a very important role because we humans are emotional beings and we are driven by our emotions, we are driven by our society and the culture. So let's move from one to the other, which is general to a more specific. So geographical factors are basically factors that are reasons that are because of the geography in that region, right? If you have a, let's say, desert region, right, and you have lots of desert sandy regions but very less water. Now as humans, we are not adapted like camels. We don't have humps, so we will always keep it in mind that, okay, we have to survive in very harsh conditions. Are we okay with that? Can we survive there? Do we think that we are we're capable of doing that? That will determine if I want to stay there or not. That will also determine if your friend wants to stay there or not, and that will ultimately decide how the density of that region will be. So geographical factors can be water. It can also be landform. Landform in the sense, is it a plains and gently sloped areas or is it rugged terrain? Why rugged terrain is written as such that it's not preferred? Why plains? Plains, first of all, provides many kind of additional features. If it's a plain, you can do agriculture, you can do farming, you can have source of income. If it's a rugged terrain, you know that maybe doing agriculture, farming will be difficult on this land. So how do I ensure that I keep getting money? How do I ensure my income? How do I ensure my livelihood? And that might make a person decide, I will not be here, I will be in another region which is more of a plain. So that determines what kind of population density you have. Next is climate, which is I just discussed. If it's too hot, if it's too cold, people do live there, but then it's again up for your own preferences, right? If you cannot, then you decide to move out. Soils. Again, so I'll go back to your agriculture. So these are all interconnected, as I have told in the very start. Next, economic factors. Now, economic factors are basically presence of minerals. So if you have minerals, if you have minerals, you can do more farming. You can use those minerals for your livelihood. Level of urbanization. Urbanization is basically what is the level of job opportunity, what kind of production you have from that place. And if you have more urbanization, it's called more, it's generally called cities and developed regions, right? So you provide more job opportunities, and people who want to earn livelihood, they prefer more regions like that, and they keep moving towards that region. And as a result, the density of the place which is offering this job increases a lot. Sometimes so much that even after having ample job opportunities, you still see unemployment. Next is level of industrialization. Urbanization is providing jobs in different aspects. But when you speak about industrialization, you're getting very specific. You're talking about industries. For example, it's written here Bangalore, which is a Silicon Valley of our country. So there are many IT industries here which can offer jobs. So you will see many people across our country moving to Bangalore if they are IT oriented. So you see, it drives the density of the population. And other than that, when you talk about social, cultural, religious, political, these are incentives which are provided by the government to shift people to sparsely populated areas such that the demographic profile changes. So you see, if you have, like I said in the beginning, if a community decides to be together, that's a social phenomena, and they will always move together in a region wherever they want to move. Cultural makes you feel like I want to be close to my community people, so you move to that region with where you have your cultural beliefs and you align with the society around you. So there are various reasons which drive why people are there where they are. Okay, right. So when this happens, when you have people moving from one place to other, the number of population or the number of humans are changing. But when you see this change over a period of time, this phenomena is called population growth. It's the increase in the number of a population or a dispersed group. A dispersed group is basically a group that has moved from one region to another. So population growth is a very important phenomena because it tells you how the population is changing. Population growth rate, anything which is rate is basically, it's telling it what pace it is happening. For example, here population growth rate will mean rate at which the number of individuals in a population is increasing in a given period of time. So you say, let's say you want to see in 10 years, which is how you generally look at population growth. So if you want to see in 10 years, did the population increase in this region? It can have its own ramifications. For example, let's consider Bangalore, okay? And you want to see how much population growth is happening. So this concept will become more clearer as you move ahead in the lecture. But just to understand, if you want to see how much population bloom has happened for Bangalore, just compare it with some decades-year-old density census, and you will see that's a bloom in the population growth number, and that also brings a change in the rates, right? Now, the ramification is positive aspects. Of course, you have more output, you have more production, so everyone is having a better livelihood. But then that better terms comes with its own problem. Every place has its own resources, and when there are people, or when there is the population density which is more than what the place can sustain, then there are additional problems like, if you consider short in a small region, it will be food scarcity. If you consider a big region like a city, it will be additional problems to the livelihood of people. There will be jams, there will be unemployment, there will be other kind of problems associated because of more more number of people than it can sustain. So that is why you should look at population growth rate, and you should understand how the population is changing over the period of time. Now, how do you actually determine this? What kind of growth rate you are looking into? The first is natural growth. Growth means you're looking at decrease, but you should also remember population doesn't only mean the number is increasing. There are also people who are moving away from the population, and they are in the form of people who have died. So when you look into growth, it basically is how many people came, because how many people were born, they add through the population, right? But subtract the number of people who have died. So let's say you begin with 20 number of people, and you have 10 additional children, like 10 number of birds were there. So you have so let's say in 1 year there were 10 birds, and so after 1 year the number of population should be 20 plus 10. But then also there were 3 deaths. So 3 people actually died. So the actual population number at the end of your next year will be 20 plus 10, but minus 3. That's 30 minus 3, that's 27. So the actual number is 7 instead of the 10, because there are 3 people who have moved away from the population. So when you actually look into the natural growth, that's just death and birth. But that's the natural growth. But when you look at the actual growth is also accommodating for the people who have moved into that new region. So I said there were 20 people. What if there were 15 people who moved from other region to this region because of several factors that we have just discussed? So it's not only the 27, the 7 addition, it's also those 15 that you will add into this population when you look into the density and the census. So actual also brings into this migration, the movement of people. But when you see natural processes, that's only birth and death. So these are the 2 ways you define your population, what census you are taking. Now when you do that, when you look into what kind of population number you have, what is the population growth rate, one very important aspect that is looked into is sex ratio. Now sex ratio is basically the number of females per male, right? And when you look per male, you basically talking 1,000 males. So you've said, let's say there are 1,000 males that you are looking for in a region. You say for that 1,000 male, how many females are there? Now this is important in societies because first of all, if you look into our country, females are, like because of some beliefs, females are killed. So this census also makes you realize that the female infanticide is not correct. But that's not what we are looking into here. But when we are looking from a human geography perspective, what we are trying to say here is, let's see how many females are there for the male, right? And then you can look into the map and you can see that there are some regions, for example here, who have 56%. So you have equal number of males and equal number of females. That's a stable society or a stable population. But then you have some regions which are 46, 48, which are lesser. Now what they're saying is there are more females than males. When does this happen in a scenario? When does this happen in a region? It happens in a region when the males are moving out of these regions for some requirement. For example, jobs. For example, mostly job, because it's a general thing that the males move out to earn and the females stay back. So males are moving out and the females are staying, where they're bringing a skew in the sex ratio. That's also problematic for the next population or the next generation of the population, because if you don't have males, you don't have reproduction, you don't have population that increases, or you don't have new addition to the population, and the population can decimate. And that's exactly why your sex ratio becomes important, right? So like I just mentioned, the concept that is associated with the sex ratio is the age structure of the population. So here, so you have age structure is basically trying to show you in a given population what is the proportion of different aged people. Now ages are basically divided into on the basis of young children, working class and old people. It's the working class that drive the economy of the country. Children cannot do it, but children will contribute to the next population, next generation that can bring the money. But old people are the ones, they are relying on the working community. They are also not actively bringing money. They are not actively working. So their livelihood depends on the working class, and it's the working class that drives the livelihood of the community or the society here. So you should have a balance in that term. Now here, and how does the population change in these different classes is what we are trying to see when we say age structure of the population. So let's try to look into the different kind of growth you can make out by looking at the age structure of the population. So first one is a rapid growth. Now what do you see by a rapid growth? So this vertical line in between, the on the left you see a male and on the right you see a female. So equal distribution means there is equal sex ratio or equal number of males and females. Now rapid growth, you see when you have more, so you have more of blue colored bars, and then you have more of yellow colored regions, and then you have more of the 45. Yeah, so you have more of the yellow or blue, then light yellow, and then the orange color. Now what does it translate to? You have more of children, then you have substantial portion of working class, and then you have the old age people. Now why is it rapid growth? Because the number of children is increasing. Just a second. Yeah, just a second. Coming back to it. Yeah, so your number of children is increasing the population, and that means that your number of people who are increasing, or number of births is increasing, and that is leading to rapid growth of the population, because your number of young generation is increasing at a faster pace, which is why they are broader at the base. So this is rapid growth. Now compare this to slower growth. Slower growth will be the opposite, or something that is not following the previous trend. I said the previous trend have more of children. That means in a slow growth, you should have less number of children. And this is what you see. Look at the bar of the or yellow and the blue. They are at the similar width, means their number is same or similar. That means you hardly have any, you hardly have any new addition. If you look into the bars, you will see slight changes at the end. There is slight increase in the number. They are slightly more than the working class, but not a substantial number. So you have growth, but at a very slow rate. Now compare this to zero growth. Zero growth means there should be no addition, no new children. The children number should be as same or even lesser than what is the working class. But when you come, what is the importance of this is when you look into the negative. Negative is basically where you have no new children or no new addition to the population. It's showing lesser number of young children as compared to the older people. When does this become problem? These children are supposed to contribute to the working class. If you have less children than older people, then over the period of time, these young children will transform to working class, and your old class will keep on increasing, but you have very little population that will serve as the working old generation that contribute to the newer population. So you have less working class in the next generation, and if you have less working class, and I said that they drive the livelihood of the society, that will have a negative impact on the society, on the population, and that's why it is termed as negative growth. Zero growth means no changes. Slow growth, there is change. You do have increase in the population number, but at a very slow pace. Rapid growth, you have excessively high number of young generation, which will contribute to the working class in the next generation. Okay, now again, similar to this, you have the related concept of median age. Median age is a age in the population where you have equal number of population below and above it, right? Now see what first, let's see the trend here, and then I'll try to explain the concept to you. So you have different classes here: 14 to 20, 20 to 25, 25 to 30, and it goes on till 40 plus. So you have 14 to 20 in most part of Africa. You have 20 to 25, which are the speech colored regions. Then you have 25 to 30, which is in US, India, parts of Africa, even South America, and parts of Asia. Then you have 30 to 35, which is a spring color, which is mostly in South America. 35 to 40, US, Asia, and Australia. And then you have 40 plus, which is in the upper Asia region and towards the upper end of America. Now what happens here? Let's say you have these regions, which is in Africa. The median, as you will know from statistics and maths, that median is basically the central point of the data set, right? Now, if you're saying your median age is, one second. Right. Now, if you say your median age of a population is 14, just imagine 14 years is the median. It means that the ages below and the ages above have same number of population size. That means old people and young people are basically not that far away from each other. The main proportion of the population are young children. Now compare this to 40 plus. 40 plus is basically you are shifting your median to the end. You're saying that 40 plus are the midpoint. you have as many people higher, as many people lower. This is a more of an old population driving population, right? Then compare this to 25 to 30, which is a working class. Now, if working class is the majority portion, if you're in your country or in your region, that means that you have a stable source of income. There are more people who are able to work as compared to the regions where you have 14 to 20, which are mainly children driven. How are you gonna increase the livelihood, or how are you gonna increase the conditions of the country? Similarly, if you have 40 plus as your median age, they are not even hardly working, or they are in the toward the end of their working class. Again, you have a very disproportionate between the ratio between the working class and the old population and the young population. This all brings instability to the population as a whole. So that's why median age is very important. And how does the median change, or how does the median age change? It's based on the number of births a woman can give, right? If a woman is able to contribute more, sire more kids, give birth to more number of child, that increases the population size, and that increases the median age. Why? Because if you have more population, more number of children, then your population size increases, and your population number will also increase as compared. So let's look into these different graphs to understand this better. Now this graph here is about median age and births per woman. So now see, on the x-axis you have births per woman, so how many kids were sired by a woman, and on the y-axis you have median age. Now see, if one woman gives to birth to only one kid, the median age generally is on the higher end. So you can see here, these are for this country. If they are less birth per woman, which means there are less addition to the population, then the median age will shift towards the older people because they are more in number, so there will be more of that median age. Now see this, towards the extreme end, if a woman gives birth to 6 individuals, so the median age will shift towards the bottom because now you have more of children, so your children are dominating the population. But neither this, neither the other are sustainable. So what you see is most of the countries, the ones which are, like in a better position, or which have better, like income and economic condition, they fall in the intermediary range. There are 3 to 4 births per woman, and the median age is in the working class category, which is between 20 to 30. So this is what you are trying to say, that how does the median age of that country, and how does it relate to birth per woman? And why are we even discussing this by so much of detail? Because this affects the population growth rate. Now see, here in this graph, you have children per woman, and you have the annual rate of the population. Very intuitive, not very difficult to understand. If you have more number of children, your population growth will increase. If you have less number of children, your population growth will decrease. But this ramification is in the terms of future. If the population is not increasing, then that the region will not increase, and the population can decimate over a period of time. So if you compare the same thing with natural population growth rate, which is median age, this is the same plot but using different parameters. If your median age is higher, what do you think the population growth rate should be? Before me explaining from the graph, and you could try without looking into the graph. If the median age is higher, I say a population in a region has a median age of 50 years. What do you think the population growth rate would be? Higher or lower? It will be lower because you have more of a older or high, older dominated population. So you actually have a negative growth rate because there it basically means that there are hardly any new population addition, new addition to the population. And this is negative because you don't want that to happen. But if I say that a region has 20 as its median age, then its population growth rate will be very high. That is also not very sustainable because then it's very high population. I told you there are certain resources limit. So again, the median age that is preferred is between 20 to 40 or 20 to 30, where you have the annual growth rate as 2%, 1%, which is sustainable. And we'll see sustainability, the concept of it in a few while. Right. Now I told this about this in the previous part. Now, all this while we have been discussing about population growth rate, sex ratio, how the sex ratio determines population growth rate, how does median age of population determines the population growth rate, how does the number of birth per woman determine the population growth rate. Now there is one more factor that determines what is the level of distribution of human first of all, and then how does it affect the population growth rate. Then that is the level of urbanization. Urbanization is basically, so just by intuition, because our country is one of the, like where we can clearly see the differences between rural and urban lifestyle. So you have very different lifestyle in rural and urban, and they manifest themselves in terms of livelihood, economic growth, the social conditions, age sex structures, population density, and other parameters. And because we are from India, and I think to this crowd, I don't have to really explain the difference between urban and rural and what kind of differences you see in these parameters among these two regions, right? So the differences in these level of urbanization are also part of human geography that we had looked into the very first slide. And while the criteria for differentiating now, because I just mentioned India, I should also mention that the criteria for differentiating between urban, rural, it varies within countries. What the level of urbanization is for India could be very different from US, because in global terms, we consider US as a developed nation and India as a developing nation or developing country. So our level of urbanization and rural areas are different than what US will consider as urban and rural. But that doesn't give away the factor that there is still this difference between urban and rural, and this leads people to migrate from one region to other. This gives rise to change in density, and this also gives rise to the change in the population growth rate in the region that you are trying to observe, right? And mainly what drives the movement from rural to urban is the job opportunities, the livelihood, the economy of that region, right? And we have already discussed this previously. The other thing that determines migration or human density is literacy rate, and this is interconnected with jobs, interconnected with livelihood. Here on the map, if I have not discussed in the previous map, I'll just like to go once again. Here in this map only, you can see the level of urbanization is so different, right? But this is at a global scale. Now you look at India, it's showing one single color. But when you zoom in into India and you try to look into the urbanization in India only, because your parameters will change, then you will see gradations in color in India as well. But when you're looking at a global scale, you can see at a global scale too, you have varying level of urbanization with very high urbanization in US and parts of Arab, parts of South America, and very little urbanization again in some parts of Africa, some parts of Asia. So you see there's varying level of urbanization, and that's why you see movement of people from these rural or unurbanized areas to more of urbanized regions. Similarly, if you look at literacy rate also is so this is also an indicator of your socio-economic development, your standard of living, your availability of education facilities, government priorities. And as we would understand it better, if we know that we have more accessibility to education in a region, we try to go to those regions because we understand the importance of education and how that can impact our livelihood in future. So again, you can look into this map and you can see how literacy rate as well changes globally from different regions to different regions. So you can see the literacy rate is very high again in the very same regions where you just saw urbanization, and very less in the very same regions you just saw rural areas. So you see there's almost perfect correlation between this map and this map, showing that literacy rate and urbanization are interconnected. And when you have literacy rate and urbanization higher, you have more individuals, you have more density, your population growth is also increasing. So all these concepts are interrelated with each other, but they're trying to say the same thing, that these are what drive humans from one region to another. Right. And lastly, just like I said, all this contribute to economic development of a region. And here again, you will see a correlation between what the two maps that we have just seen. But how do you define economic development? When do you say just the terms that I've just used, developed countries and developing countries, and it has better economic development, we have less economic development? It's when you look into the GDP of the region. What is GDP? Its full form will be gross domestic produce. Domestic means in that region, gross means total, and produce is what are you trying to produce from that country. Now you can look into different parameters, but it basically tells you whatever the country is producing, how does it rank when you look into the global scale. And you can see there are some regions in the world which have very, very less GDP, and which again you can see there is a correlation between all the literacy rate, urbanization, childbirth, all these. And then there are some regions which have very high GDP. So there's very high disparity because there is very high disparity in the number of population that are there that are driving the economy of those countries and regions. And this is what is the main factor why at all you have these variations. And why did we even read about it? Why did we even study about it? Because all these pull people from one region to another. They kind of make people migrate from one region to other, and the main reason for this migration is to have better livelihood, better job, better sustainability, and better growth as individual and as a country. Now we have spoken a lot about population growth and population numbers increases and decreases. This is where I start the second lecture of the series, or this week's second lecture, where you actually see how do you actually calculate population growth rate and why is it so important when we are looking into it. Now, population growth rate was studied or was first told by Thomas Malthus. Now, what did he say? He said that humans, if you see here, they grow exponentially. So, 2 people giving us 4 people, 4 to 8, 8 to 16. So, it grows exponentially. But the food or the resources, they increase in a logarithmic scale, or they increase linearly. So, if you visualize the Malthusian model, if you look into here, this is time and this is the number. Over a period of time, if you keep moving towards the right of your x-axis, with increase in time, your human population shoots up suddenly. That's the exponential growth. But when you look into the food production, it is increasing linearly. Now, up until this red color circle, if you look to the left of the red color circle, the food is always higher than the number of people. And Malthus says this is okay because you have more food than the number of people. So they can all use those resources. Here it is shown in terms of food. So you can all have food, they can all survive, they can all live. But there will be a point, because the pace at which both of these are increasing is different. There will be a point which is demarcated by this red circle here, where all of a sudden human population will be too high, much higher than the actual resources. And that's when you will start having this balance in the nature and you have instability. This point is called the Malthusian catastrophe. And how he sums it up says that in a very short time, as you can only see just by looking into the scale here, in a very short time the population will overrun the food supply and there will be a shortage of food, right? Now what does he say? So like this is what he's saying, right? So he has population growth, which is a geometrical progression, and food production, which is arithmetic. So geometrical progression is basically your ratio remains same. 2 increases to 4, 4 increases to 8, 8 increases to 16. In very simple terms, if you look into the ratio of what? Ratio of the next generation here to the previous generation. So 4 by 2 is 2, 8 by 2 is 2, 16 by 2 is 2. So ratio remains same. And food production, the difference remains the same. So whatever was 2 becomes 4. So the difference remains the same. 4 minus 2, 2. 6 minus 4, 2. But here, so in arithmetic, you don't look at the fraction or proportions. You don't look like 4 divided by 2 and 6 divided by 4. That's not equal. That's difference here is constant, and in geometry, the fraction is constant. Well, that's about the maths of it. But you have these two growth rate, and there will be a certain point when there will be disequilibrium between the population and food supply. So how do he also says several ways of correcting. First is positive check. What is positive check? It's basically natural checks which are forces natural by force nature, where you have earthquakes, epidemics, famines and floods. Now in earthquakes, epidemics, what is trying to say is there will be sudden reduction in the population number, and then it will bring down the population number that will be in a balance with the lower number of food resources. So they are checked by nature in several repeated time. You will have these natural checks and the population number will go down. Or you can also have preventive measures where it's on the individual. You can have late marriage, you can have celibacy, you abstain from like getting married ever. You have control contraceptive where you have self-restraint that you will not indulge in any reproductive behavior. If you have family planning where you decide, okay, we will only give rise to one, will not overpopulate. So all these are preventive measures, but that's on the individual. It's all, if you see all the factors here, late marriage, celibacy, self-restraint, family planning, this is all individual at the human level. There is no additional factor that contributes to this population theory, right? So this is what Malthus says, and he also very nicely gives you the formula for how do you do the calculations actually. So you basically have P, which is, let's say, the population that you want studying at this point of time. So how do you calculate it with? You say what was the total starting population number into e to the power RT. This is a very standard population growth rate formula which you have already must have looked into. So E is basically Euler's number. R and T relate to the population that you are looking into. So what is the rate of the population growth, and what is the time that you are looking into? Are you looking into a difference of 10 years, 2 years, 3 years? How do you look into it? And then there's related to this is the doubling time. Doubling time is basically when does the population suddenly becomes double. If this time is large enough, it says that the population is increasing at a very small pace. If it's very quick, for example, in case of bacteria, it basically says that the population is increasing at a very fast rate and it's becoming double at a very quicker pace. So it basically, in terms of Malthusian model, you're just trying to say how much the population is increasing and when can you expect the overshoot to happen, and you can see the disequilibrium. But all the points that he just said about one being geometric progression, one being arithmetic progression, one being that preventive checks are there, one being that you can have positive checks, they all have found to be faulted at some point of time. So let's look into them one by one. The first here is time for the world population to double. So when you look into the doubling rate, for 2 to become 4, 4 to become 8, there is a constant rate between these. So the timing remains, if you look at the same timing, your rate should be constant. But just by looking at this graph here, what does this graph say? This graph says this is from 1600 to 2100. So from 2100 onward, this is the predicted part. How much the population will increase in over a period of time. So you're seeing how much the populations have changed, and on the on your other axis you have the number of years it took for the population to get double, right? So here let's start to read this map. This is also there in the lecture. So if you start from 1600, you start with 1534, it comes to 1737. Here what it says, it took 697 years. It's in how much years it is taking for it to double, right? 697 is here. So at this time, for the population to become double, it just took it 697 years, right? Let's come to little ahead in time. Here it took 594 years to double. It should have been constant. Move certain ahead in time. It suddenly dropped to 260 years of timeline to become double. What do you see? What do you see is the population is doubling at faster pace. It's taking 260 years, while it was taking 697 years earlier. It's now taking only 267. It reduced even further. It became 125, it became 76, it became 47. Population growth rate is increasing because their doubling rate is reducing. But again, after 47, suddenly you have 37, but then you have 48, 70, 190. So your rate is again increasing because now it's expected that because we understand the overburdening over the problems that can be there because of increase in population size, the same preventive checks or the positive checks are now being actively put into force, and we are trying to control the population number, right? And this is what they're trying to say. But the overall picture here, why it is a criticism to Malthusian model, is because it is not constant. The first tenet of Malthusian model saying that population growth rate is constant is wrong. It is not geographic. It actually follows a very different pattern depending on many other factors. That's the first criticism. First point gone. Second point, if you now look into this, change in the cereal production or yield and land use and population world, here you see, you can actually look into the way population growth rate is compared to the food. So food has been, like depicted as cereals here. So what they are trying to show in this map is how does the food change over a period of time as population. Here what you see is very interesting. Population growth is linear, while cereal production and cereal yield are not at all following a linear trend. It's actually exactly opposite to what Malthus said. Malthus said that you will see a linear increase in the food and an extreme exponential increase in the population. But this is the opposite of this. So you can see, and this is from real world data, and you can see that this is not following the Malthusian model. Next, so if you go to the previous model graph, at the bottom you see land use. So land use is basically the land that is devoted to being used for agriculture. Now, what you see here is total area by type of use. You see this most of them are for livestock, then you have forest, then you have barren land, you have all the glaciers. Now this livestock can also be increased, right? So you have change in land use also, and you can already see that the land use also is changing over time. What is trying to say here, that if you're changing land use, just a second. Yeah. So what are your the map, or what the whole idea here is, that if you're able to change the land use, that means your productivity, your food production should also increase, right? And it should increase exponentially because you are now able to use more land than one you were previously using. So if your land use changes, it is just imperative for you to understand that your food production will also increase, and that will increase at an exponential rate because now you're increasing your land use. So the possibility of using additional land for your cultivation or agriculture was not thought by Malthus at all, or incorporated in his model at all, and that's a criticism to the model because that doesn't follow the general pattern. Next, again, the very same thing. The land use pattern has changed over the period of time, and you can see the amount or the area that is used by different countries have changed over the period of time. Just goes on to say that how they are investing in increasing the yield of that region or increasing their livelihood. Okay, right. Next is what you see, that there is a decoupling of agricultural land and food production. Just because I said that you can use land more, there will be an addition of food production. But that is not the case always. Why is that not the case always? What I mean to say here is, let's say you do not increase land. Let's say you just work with the same land over the period of time. Then you should follow Malthus model. That is also not true. Why is that not true? Because now we have methods and technologies that can enhance the productivity on the same land year over year. Fertilizers, manures, pesticides, all these are a very prominent field of research, and they are increasing the quality and the quantity of the production. So you basically might not even have to include the land use pattern change, because just by looking into the technology, you can say that the land use might stay same, but the production will increase. And the possibility of technology in future was not considered by Malthus, then that model is absolutely unusable in today's form of world. So this is what we are trying to say, that if you are using fertilizer, your production is increasing so high. So this is what we are trying to say, that if you use fertilizer, your crop yield increases. You don't even have to change the land use. But the possibility of this was not included in Malthusian model. That's why that's not the correct model to begin with. And there are many additional factors. So Malthus said, wherever you see population increase, and then you will see population increase, and then you see food production. But what he did not see was, it is not constant for across the world. Like so far we have been discussing, the population growth rate of any density is driven by wealth, by economy, and that's very disparately spread around the world. So there will be different rate of production, different rate of growth of population in different regions of the world because of different wealth. Then he said, in population growth rate, his tenet was population will increase because number of individuals who are born will increase. What about death rate? What he meant was, there was no comment on death rate. It was always about increase in birth. But in today's world, where you have very good healthcare facilities, your death will also not change. On the contrary, your number of deaths will be decreasing. With decrease in death also, you will have more population. Remember where we spoke about how do you actually look into population growth rate, where you subtract the number of individuals who have died. If there are less number of individuals who are dying, your overall population will look more in number. That's also population rate. There's also population increase, and that will increase the population rate. So why he only looked into the birth, but he had no comments on the death, which again is because of lowering of the number of deaths, you see an increase in the population. That aspect was not looked into. And along with that, there are the two checks that he mentioned is also problematic. The first check is positive check, where he said, natural phenomena will occur where there is more human population. And as you would have heard in the lecture, what happens in Japan by itself is a low density population. So there should not be positive any natural force acting there, but nature doesn't look into this. Nature doesn't care, doesn't have a imperative that okay, there is more population here, so I should be more damaging there. That doesn't happen. Japan has tsunami, Japan has so many deaths, but even though it's a low population area, you still have positive checks there. Similarly, your preventive checks, which were all about individuals, which were all about morals of human, like celibacy and self-restraint. Again, you have technology there, you have contraceptives that you can use to control the birth rate. So you don't really have to have preventive checks. In today's world, you have several advanced phenomena which are being in use for population control rate. So you see that Malthus model has several criticism to it, and this brings us to the fact that then actually how does the population increase in world? On the left is what you are imagining from Malthus model, but on the right is what you actually look into, looks like when you actually look into the population growth rate. It's a logistic curve. Logistic means it will reach a asymptote after some point of time, where you have a carrying capacity. What is carrying capacity? If a region has this many resources, then it can only sustain these many number of population. Once that is reached, there will no additional increase or enhancement in the population size because there is no resources to help that. So you see here, this is what it says. So initially, when you look into the growth rate, it will increase very quickly because there are many resources. So the resources are being used, multiple individuals, everything is being faster rate. So your rate of increase is very high. Then there will be a point which is called point of maximum growth before that region, before that point basically, you have high growth rate, which is, I will come to that. I will not use the words here so that you can relate it to the next slide. After that point, you have diminishing growth rate. Why is that? Because now the resources have started to become equal number of population, equal number of resources. So there are no enhancement in growth rate. Whatever can sustain the enhanced population, they are being used upon. And then there will be a population size where you have no more resources left. So you have no more population growth, and it will now become zero and possibly even negative, because now if you don't eat, if you don't have resources, you start dying. Now, where do you see this in practice in a very quicker rate? You see this in bacterial culture. You see any bacterial culture, you will see these phases very distinctively. You have a lag phase. Lag phase is basically when it's everything is just starting to build up. Then you have a log phase, which is the exponential phase. So here you have increase in the number of living bacterial cells. Then you have a stationary phase where you have plateau in the number of bacterial cells, where you have rate of cell division and death roughly equal. But then after a certain point of time, you have the decline phase where your exponential decrease will happen because there are no more resources to sustain the growth, right? Now, we have just looked into different population growth rate and how does it actually happen. But why do these happen? Have we thought about it yet? Why are there deaths and why are there increases in number? These can be different regions. One can be intrinsic, like physiological and behavioral. So you have reproductive ages, you have the behavioral changes that can give rise to this number of changes, or extrinsic, like all the, so you have weather, you have predator. So we are talking in terms of humans. So we can talk about diseases, parasites, weather, food, shelter, water. All these can lead to these population dynamics. And intrinsically, the human perspective, reproduction age, how is your behavior? Are you a celibate in terms of Malthus? Are you a celibate? You don't want to reproduce, so you're not contributing to the population size is not increased. So all these is how your population growth will change, right? So we have had extensive discussion on population growth rate today, and like I said in the very beginning, now I have summarized the entire two lectures into a series of questions, which help us look into these in a more better way. So I've been on and talking for so long, and you must have some in point, middle point. You could have lost me. So we'll try to revise that, but in a very quicker manner. So here you have 5 questions, and read the questions. See if you understand the question and the options, and try to guess the options. And of course, I will discuss the answers. Maybe I'll wait for 1 or 2 minutes for you to answer, and come. That's then we can discuss the answers quickly. Let me read out the questions for you in the case the question doesn't become clear. First question is, if children per woman is large, like the number of children births by the woman is large, showing that on average women are producing more number of children, then how will the median or age of the population change, right? Think in the first the age and then think how will it change. Second is, which of these is commonly observed in primitive society? Which of these concept of a relationship between human and the physical world do you see in primitive societies? Third, level of urbanization providing job opportunities. This is a factor. What kind of factor, however, which will influence the density of population? Next, which of these given factors, geographical region, is not influencing the density of population? Key term here is geographical factor. So be careful of which one is geographically more inclined. Next is, which of these is not a pull factor for migration? So basically, which of these does not, you know, uh, attract people to move towards a region? I will wait for maybe 1 minute for you to look into the answer and try to solve it, and then we'll give the answer to you. Okay, so I have received one answer. Maybe 30 more seconds for others to look into, and then I'll give the answers. Meanwhile, I'll look into the answer myself. T. Okay, so by my clock, it's 1 minute because we have 20 questions. So I want to put you quickly. But as you know, these will be available on these as recorded lectures. So you can always come back and you can always revise from this part before looking into the answers. Right. So C, A, B, D, D is what you answered and you got it right. And if you were thinking on the right direction, that's even okay. You could to getting the questions correct. So let me read out the answers, and if you've not had clarity, you should be able to answer. The first one was if the women is producing more number, then the middle name will go down because you have more of children in the population. So your age of the population will become less. So you will go down. Second is primitive societies. As I had said, you mainly find them in the rural areas, and there environmental determinism is what drives them. Next, level of urbanization is providing job opportunities. So if you have job opportunities, it's a economic factor because it's related to money and livelihood. Fourth is which of these is not a geographical factor? Presence of mineral is an economic factor because mineral doesn't directly impact if I can live there or not. But what it impacts is how much I can earn, how much my income will be. So that's a economical reason. And last is pull factor, political turmoil. Political reasons can be a pull factor, but turmoil generally makes people move out of that region. And I'm pretty sure you're aware of the current political scenarios in the country and around us. Okay, next set of 5 questions. First is natural growth in population refers to number of people dash minus the number of people dash. So what is exactly the parameter, which is very easy. Next is which of these is commonly observed during humanizing of nature. Remember naturization of human and humanizing of nature. So what does this actually begin? What does this actually mean? So next is the demographic transition. Sees a society move from. Demographic transition is basically what gives rise to population growth rate differences. Demography is anything which is to do with population. Transition is a change from one perspective to another. And what kind of changes do you see in a population over a period of time? Next is dash is an important indicator about the socio-economic status of women and gender discrimination in the society. I'll let you attempt it, and then when I give you the answer, I will try to explain it. And the next one is the population from around so and so age is a working population. When do you call this population a working population? Again, I'll wait for 1 minute, over and a half, and then give you the answer for it. E, Okay, so it's 1 minute over in my clock. So let me give you the answers. Right. So A, B, C, D, A. You all got it right. And if you were thinking on the right direction, that's also equally commendable. So the first one is very intuitive. Number of people born minus number of people dead. Next is where do you see humanizing of the nature? Possibilism, because we said, right, in possibilism you see possibilities of using the nature according to your needs. So that's when you humanize the nature. Next is demographic transition in a society is from high birth rate, high death rate to everything becoming lower birth rate, lower death rate because you have utilized the resources there. So from a high to a lower shift. Next is Dash is the important indicator of socio-economic status of women and gender discrimination, that is sex ratio. And if you remember, when I was discussing sex ratio, I did move to gender discrimination in form of female infanticide. So we did discuss that what are the perceptives of a society, how do they view women as, what is the socio-economic status, and where does gender discrimination affect into the society. So sex ratio, as correctly guessed, and if you would have thought about it, that was you were correct in there. And 15 to 64 is the working age, which is related to the population age structure concept that we had studied. Quickly moving to the next set of 5 questions. Next is according to Malthusian model, which is correct. Very intuitive, which is very easy to do. Next is the logistic growth curve. What kind of shape does it take? So just try to imagine the graph and see what kind of shape it takes. Next is which of these is a positive check according to Malthus. Now the thing here is positive check. There are two type of checks, positive and preventive. So out of these, which one is positive check? And then you have the society that produces lesser number of children and reducing population size. How does the population growth rate get affected out of these four? And which of these is an intrinsic population of a cause of population dynamic? Intrinsic means pertaining to human, the individual. So which of these pertains to that? It is 1 minute by my clock. Yeah, and let me see. Okay, so let me give you the answers, and you can check if you had got that in the correct order. Just a second. Right. So the first one is according to Malthusian model, geometric population. Sorry, the population increases in geometric rate and food supply is in arithmetic. Logistic curve is actually S-shaped. The exponential, which shoots up suddenly, it's a J-shaped curve. Okay. Which of these is positive check? It's positive. The keyword is anything which is not under one's control. So war is not under someone's control. So that's positive. Next is society which has lesser number of people and reducing population. So you see the terms here. This is reducing. The number of population is reducing. There are very less number of children. So it's such a negative growth rate because there is nothing that adds to the population in the future generation. And which of these is an intrinsic cause of population dynamics? It's physiology because that pertains to an individual. So A, C, B, B, D. Okay. Okay. And that brings me to the last 5 questions for this first part of the today's session. So this is very easy. The first one, the book of an essay on the principle of population was written by. Why is it important? Is when I give you the answer, is you should be able to relate to it. Which of this is a preventive check? If you have done positive check, this is the other check, preventive check. Next is which of this is not a criticism to Malthusian model? Read properly the options and then go for the answer. And then what is the correct order of bacterial population growth stages? So we have discussed this. This is easy. And then which of this is an extrinsic cause of population dynamic? We have this is not an extrinsic. We have already looked into the intrinsic. So here we are looking into the extrinsic causes. Again, I'll wait and come back in 1 minute. Okay, so it's already over a minute. Maybe I'll wait for 15 more seconds if you are still thinking. C, A, D, or B, B, B. Okay, all right. I got the answers. Let me give you the solutions. And yeah. So the first one is the book on essay of principle of population is given by Malthus. And why is it important? Because in this book is where he gives this model on population growth, right? Now, which of these is a preventive check according to Malthus? Preventive is basically on your own self, so it's foresight. You think about it and you know those kind of stuff. Which of these is not a criticism to Malthusian growth model? Let's do this easily. First one, population growth rate is sigmoidal. So what the question wanted to see was, in these options, which one is in accordance with Malthus model. So the option and the Malthus model matches. So growth rate doesn't match to Malthusian model, so it's not a criticism. I mean, it's actually a criticism. It's not in coherence. Second is exponential growth rate is exponential. He says it's linear, it's exponential. So this is also criticism. Role of technology is not incorporated. So you see, Malthus did not think about technology, and that's why it's a criticism. But population growth rate is due to increased birth rate is exactly what Malthus said. But what Malthus did not say was his comment on mortality. He did not say that there will be reduced mortality, because in his time he saw that there was very high mortality. So he thought that this doesn't change. What changes in the number of people, how many people are being added. But he did not think that mortality rate can also go low. So that's why it's that this particular thing doesn't match with the this matches with the Malthusian model, and it's not a criticism to the model as such if you write it in this way. But he said about agriculture, is linear. It's so I'll go back here. Wait a minute. He said food supply is arithmetic. Arithmetic is linear. Linear is basically constant over time. Exponential is basically when you are thinking sudden boom, geometric progression. So when you say exponential, you basically mean, you know, 2 to the power 4, 4 2 into 2, 4 into 2, 8 into 2, like that. So exponential. That's why you, even in sigmoidal, the opposite one is exponential when it's sudden blooms. So when we had discussed the model it, that's why it's so when you say about Malthusian model, it says that arithmetic agricultural growth is arithmetic. But we had discussed a map where we saw that agricultural growth is actually exponential, where it can bloom suddenly up. Remember the, maybe I'll go back to this so that you won't get confused. Wait a minute. Yeah. If you see here, this purple line which is showing population is linear. And this line that you see has sudden boom. It doesn't follow a straight line. It actually goes up. So that's exponential, or that is at a greater rate. So geometric progression. So when you say agriculture is arithmetic, that is not a criticism to Malthusian model. But when you say it's exponential, it is correct, right? So if it is correct, then it is a criticism to Malthusian model because it doesn't follow what it is saying. I hope that makes sense. If not, please let me know if it's not clear. It was clear. I hope it was clear. If not, please put in the message. I will definitely help you out with that. Okay. Uh, just a second. Yeah. And the next question is, which is very simple, right? Lag, log, stationary, and decline. And the last question was, which of these is not extrinsic? Behavior is intrinsic. It's for the individual. The weather, the shelter, the food quality are all depending on the external factor. So that's an extrinsic cause of population dynamics. Okay. So a big discussion on population growth rate comes to an end. If you have any doubt, please put it in the chat box. If you're still unclear about something, please do let me know. But I will move on to the next part just because of the time constraint, but I will be happy to answer any question that you have. Yeah. So let's move on to the human development and sustainable development, which is a very, very hot topic and a very common topic that is in discussion and every point everywhere in today's world, right? And it's a very, very important topic, as we have realized so far that sustainable development is a need of the hour. So what exactly does the word sustainable development mean? It means that it encompasses environmental, social, economic development, and we will see what's development and what does it actually particularly refer to. But when you say about sustainable development, you basically are trying to say environmental, social, economic, all these different spheres of development are taken care of. And what you see here is that if you have social, so you can't just look into one kind of development or two kinds of development. Let's say social and economic will make it equitable, but there will be no environmental development. If you look at environment and social, that will be bearable. You can stay there. But what about the money? If we look into environment and economic, that's viable. But then because we are social beings, what about our social factor? So all these three together make it sustainable. We'll look more into it, we'll understand it better. So what is exactly sustainable development? In very crude way, you can say that in sustainable development, you are trying to meet the need of the present, but not compromise on the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. It's in terms of water, food, electricity, fuel, waste, yes, everything. But what is it saying is, in today's world, we are so many people, and so many people would need this much amount of resources. So let's just use only this much, right? Let's not try to go very, very offshoot, because if we do that, we leave our future generations with nothing. And the idea is that present and the future both can make use of the resources, and we should limit, or we should meet our needs in this way that the future can also meet their needs, right? And there are several ways that you can do. There are several ways that you can impact on the resources that are there currently. Now, development is actually process. When we say sustainable, so we can understand something that sustains a community, understandable. But what do you what do you actually mean by development when you are saying it in terms of economy or social? You use the term, but let's just try to understand the factors behind it. So development, if you want to describe it, it will be process by which economic well-being and quality of life of nation, region, local, whichever thing you are looking at, they're improved according to a targeted goal and objective. And this is not growth. You don't say that resources have increased, so there is more number of growth, so growth is basically increase in size of any perspective. So if you say has been growth in food supply, that is not development. Development is basically when you are looking into the well-being and quality of the people, of the nation, of the region as a whole. And this case study was discussed in the lecture. It is about Bengal famine in 1942, right? What happened here is, you don't have to think, I don't want to go into too much detail because it's already been discussed. The only difference here is that the whole idea about this case study is to differentiate between growth and development. During this time, there was enhanced food supply. The food supply was not the issue here. The famine here was not because food supply was less. The famine here was because the accessibility to the food was restricted, was not uniform. People were not able to reach the food sources, and that brought the famine. So what does it highlight when you actually think about it? It highlights the socio-economic disparity. There were food, but there were restrictions on some sectors where you cannot reach the food. Where people cannot reach the food, what's the point of having increased supply of food when your quality of the people are not increasing? So this might be a growth in food supply, but this is not a developed region. Had this been a developed region, these people would have equal, or maybe you can say not equal, but you can say that they would have access to those increased food that would have increased their quality of life and their well-being. And that is what development wants to achieve. It wants to achieve economic well-being. So you increase your food production, whatever production you're looking at, but you also want to increase the quality of the life. So that the quality factor comes into play when you're talking about development. So, and how do you, now, when you say want to look at the quality, you have these three indices that you look into: life expectancy, education, and income. Now, life expectancy is basically, like the number of years a person can survive. If it increases, that means your health is increasing, and that's why your expectancy is increasing. So that means that your well-being of quality is there. Education index is how much your education has increased, how much schooling you have done, how much schooling is expected, how much schooling you can provide, how accessible is education to the younger crowd, how easily can they reach to the school, what level of education then they can achieve by this access. That gives you again a bearing on the quality of life, because if you educate yourself, you're able to enhance your income in future. And that brings us to the end index, which is income index. This has bearing on the uh, livelihood part of the development, economic aspect of the development. So these three are what you say when you say a country is developed. You mean to say that all these indices are very high for those countries. When you say a country is developing, you say that these are in moderate rates. When you say it's underdeveloped, you say that these indices are not met, or these indices are not at their proper number. So, and why, and now we come to see how does your economic growth, that means your production, and how does the development enhance or go a relationship between them. So we'll go in a gradation. We'll first look into the leftmost, which is just a simple black color curve, and then we'll look into this. Now, the first one is direct relationship between economic growth and your development. So, empowerment here basically tells about development. Empowerment is basically you're trying to enhance the life scale. So, like I said, development is everything: life, sustainability, everything about the human. So, you're empowering the human. So, empowerment is also a feature which you can put as a proxy for development. And on this is production. So production is directly related to economics, economic growth. So you say this is the limit that a society can reach to. Why? Because it is the resources that the society can use. So this is a maximal resources of empowerment it can achieve, and this is the maximal production it can achieve. If it puts everything at zero, no empowerment to anyone, and all resources are being fully utilized for production, of course you will have the maximal production. But if you have everything for humans and everything for the betterment of the quality of life and no production, then you have maximum empowerment but no production. So you have a gradation here of how much resources you can use and how much development you can see. Now this can be altered. This graph can be altered by enhancing the production rate. So whatever resources you have, you start putting more efforts to increase the production. What does that change? That just change how much production you can do. Your resources are still capped. You have increased technology that can make use of the resource to bring more produce. Yes. So that will increase production, but that doesn't increase improvement. That doesn't have any bearing on the lives of quality of life. Your production increases, but your curve still remains the same. Your empowerment doesn't change. But when you try to develop your nation, when you say that okay, we will increase the production, but we'll also try to increase the resources, we'll try to go for another type of resources. These could be non-renewable resources that are being used. Let's try to switch to a cleaner technology. Let's try to switch to renewable resources. You try to enhance the lifestyle, your entire curve shifts to the greater extent. You're now able to improve the area under this curve. That means you're able to also increase the production and the empowerment. So you're sustaining at a better pace by changing the type of like the effort that you put in to increase the production and the empowerment. So that's how these are connected. Next is we come to the actual topic, which is sustainable development. So it has, like I have already discussed, that it basically talks about people who have their needs and these needs to be fulfilled, and not only fulfilled, but you need to understand that there is a limitation that's imposed by the state of technology and the social organization on the ability to meet the future and the present needs. And these three, social, economic, and environmental, these are the three pillars of sustainability. Now, quickly, we will see what are these three terms. So when you say environmental sustainability, you mean that the ecosystem service, the air quality, green engineering, water quality will be enhanced, will be bettered, such that it also increases the production, increases the livelihood as well as the quality of life, right? So reducing effects of stressors like pollution, greenhouse. Why does that impact? Because pollution affects the individual's lifestyle. It has impact on the health of the individual. So if you control stressors like pollution, you enhance the health of the individuals, and it has a direct and indirect correlation on the likelihood the economic development. Similarly, resource integrity by minimizing waste generation or prevent accidental release in the future. So anything that has to do with environment and betterment of environment and developing techniques to better the environment is under the environmental sustainability. When you talk about economic, you can imagine you enhance the job security, you incentivize the sustainable practices, which are all about rainwater harvesting, cleaner technology, this, that's economic sustainability. You have market prices which come into the moderate range of sustainability, not too high, not too low. Similarly, life cycle cost, natural resources accounting, this extensively we have discussed in the previous session. And when you come to social sustainability, because we are social beings, this is again very important, where we are trying to say we have to look into environmental justice and empowerment of communities which are burdened by population pollution, protection of human health, social beings, increased participation of stakeholders. Stakeholders come into perspective if you want to put into the perspective of, let's say, try to find an example. Okay, the native communities. You want to enhance the forest region and conserve that region. And we have discussed, right? If we want to conserve a region, we talk to the people who stay in this region and talk to them. How can we do conservation measures such that they are also able to live according to their needs? That's their participation. You want them to be involved in the decision making so that they also feel that they are being like they are also being respected, and they can also reap the benefits out of it. So participation of the stakeholders, education, and everything that has to be doing with the social living of the individuals or the humans. Now, even though it's sustainable development, there are two types of sustainable development, as you would have seen in the lecture: weak and strong. Weak says everything in its own measures. Nature and society and economy are three spheres which are important, but they are on their own. They meet only at a certain proportion. Otherwise, they are on their own. Strong is when you realize that they are not individual component. Economy is part of society and society is part of nature. So all three are interrelated and you want to compensate all of them. This is there in your lecture. I will not go into depth, but I will quickly summarize the point. So like I said, the key idea of strong sustainability is that the substitutability of natural capital by other type of capital is severely limited. You don't want to say, I will remove the natural resources and bring in on artificial resources. You understand that this is not possible and you are limited. But in weak sustainability, even though you are taking into consideration environmental susceptibility, you're saying that natural capital and other type of capitals are perfectly substitutable, where you're saying that whatever we will manufacture, they will be more economic and eco-friendly and they will be more sustainable. But when you say strong, you know that this is not correct. Similarly, when you say consequences of the sustainability, if you have strong sustainability, there are certain human actions can entail irreversible consequence, and you take into the consideration and then take your measures. Weak says if you use technological innovations and monetary compensation, everything is fine, which is where participation of stakeholders is important. Sustainability issue here: conserving the irreplaceable stock of critical natural capital for the sake of future generation. But weak sustainability says the total value of the aggregate stock of capital should be at least maintained or ideally increased for future generation. See, the difference here is in the ideology. Both of them are looking for future generation. That's the whole tenet of sustainable development. But one is saying, let's keep it for future generation. The other is saying, let's maintain and let's also increase the production of these. One is saying, let's maintain stock of it. There are stocks, they will keep the stocks for the future generation. The other one is saying there is current number, we'll maintain this or we'll increase this. So you're not trying to conserve it or preserve it for the future generation. You just want to continue with it. So that brings to the key concept that in strong, you're looking into the critical natural capital, while in weak, your optimal allocation to scarce resources. So you're trying to use the resources and optimally allot it for sustainability. While in strong, you are saying that this is a natural capital and this is a critical natural capital, so I need to keep it for future generation. Similarly, strong sustainability says that scientific knowledge is an input for public deliberation, but weak says technical scientific approach for determining threshold and norms. Difference in ideology again. One says scientific knowledge is for procedural rationality. One says science is all about techniques. So let's just put it to technology. We don't consider about any other steps. Any other steps, man? Technology comes at the end, right? It's about production of something. But to make that thing, what to use, where to go, how to use, that part will all be human, and that part will all be about other aspects, not science. But strong is when you know that science also has bearing on where do you do, how do you do. And now that we have read about ecology, so much about geography and wildlife and other aspects, we know that science covers all these aspects, and it is important to consider about these knowledge at every step of the practice that you take for sustainability. Okay, so yeah, so the last thing that is there towards the end of the lectures are, this is the global goals. Like I said, sustainable development wants to meet a targeted goal, and this is towards the end where you have read about Agenda 21. These are the 17 goals that the world is trying to go for, to it for the entire, for looking for sustainable development. Then when it will go for sustainable development, so you have no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean and sanitation, affordable. I am not reading out all, but what I'm trying to say is these are terms that you will keep hearing in news, articles, in television, in other aspects, researches. You will see in different forms of media. This is exactly is what is the talk of the hour, and every method or every research or everything that we are trying to think is all about these 17 perspectives, and these are all there and we all know about it. It's just that we didn't formally put it as Agenda 21 and say that these are part of sustainable development goals. And one very important part of sustainable development is clean technology, which again, I am pretty sure in today's world, we all are very much aware of it. Be it in terms of transportation, be it in terms of energy. We know that we are trying to switch to hydrogen battery, hydrogen cells, or we are trying to carpooling, or we are trying to go for other mode of transport, electronic, EV. We're trying to look into cleaner sources of energy, renewable sources of energy, wind, solar, instead of looking into the canonical forms of source of energy that we are doing. We try to go for eco-friendly agriculture, clean industry, air. So these are all which are very prevalent in and around us. It's just that now we are formally looking into it. All right. And which brings me to the end of today's session with these set of 10 questions. And with that, we will summarize today's session quickly. Like always, because it's important that you look into these questions and try to understand. If you've understood the gist of it, I will read out the questions, and if it give you time to think about it. The first in which of these is not a dimension of human development index? Very easy question, should not take much time. Which of these is not a pillar of sustainability? Again, it's a revision question, so all these are very primitive questions. Now, which of these is not an example of alternative fuel for sustainable mobility? Like I said, these are all in and around us, so this is also not a very, even though I haven't discussed in detail, I'm pretty sure you will be able to guess it. The next is which of these is one of the sustainable development goals? Read the goals properly and see which one doesn't fit in the proposed goals of sustainability. And then air quality, reduced effect of stressors, resource integrity, and green chemistry. Which are they part of? Like, which sustainability do they encompass in? Yes, so my 1 minute is over, but maybe I'll wait for 10 more seconds for if you have any answers, and then I can give you the solutions. One, C, B, C, D, D. Okay, let's see. C, B, A, B, and D. Let me explain this to you. Um, the first one was easy. You know that there's nothing called social index. For development index, you're looking into income, education, and life expectancy. Pillar of sustainability, social, environment, economic. This also we have done. Which of these is not an example of alternative fuels for sustainable mobility? Biofuels, electrical drive. This is we have discussed. Fuel cell drives. LPG is actually liquid petroleum gas. It's not exactly. It's exactly what it's being said, that is petroleum. So you don't want to rely on this. You want to go for something which is more renewable types. That's why it's LPG. Right. Next is, which of these is not is one of the sustainable goals? Yeah, which is reduce hunger, as you have said it correctly. And air quality, reduced effect of stressors are part of environmental. Anything which has got to do with air is part of environmental sustainability. Right. Right. Let's move to the last five questions. So, environmental justice and empowerment of communities that are burdened by pollution. When you talk about this sustainability, which type of sustainability are you talking about? Next is, which of these is an option for power generation with renewable energy? So, which one of these is renewable? Next is, which of these is a pillar of sustainability? Again, the same kind of question in different words. Which one is odd one out with respect to impacts of unsustainable development? And so which of these is not one of the themes of clean technologies? All of these are intuitive. We know these questions already, and I'm pretty sure you'll be able to do it very quickly. ADCD, ADCD. Okay. Okay, let me give you the answers for this. So A, D, C, D, and B. I'll come to that. So the first one, as I've said, is very easy to understand. It's basically talking about when you're trying to give environmental justice and empowerment of communities. When the word is community, it's it's about social sustainability. Next is, which of these is an option for power generation? Everyone. Sewage gas, photovoltaics, geothermals are all renewable energy. Which of these is a pillar of sustainability? The same thing, social, environmental, and economical. Now, which one is odd one out with respect to impacts of unsustainable development? So, when you say overconsumption, you say climate change, you say war, these are all impact of unsustainable development. Endemic species is not unsustainable development. It's not because of any development or unsustainability. Endemic species is a inherent like we have discussed, right? It's about the geography of the region. It's about the ecological factors of that region. And last is, which of these is not one of the themes of clean technologies? Water purification, energy conservation, sewage treatment are all clean technologies. When you say coal, anything that is to be with coal, we have implicated always that this is about non-renewable energy. So we don't want to we want to shift from the use of coal to any other source of energy, and that's why this is not theme of clean technology as such, right? So with that, it comes to an end. We come to an end. Just a second. Yeah, I'll see the question. Wait a minute. Social and transboundary. Yeah, just a second. So there's, when you say transboundary, there is actually nothing like that when you formally describe it, because when you see sustainability and the pillars of sustainable development, it's about economic, it's about environmental and social. So there is no transboundary sustainability as such, but if you still want to think about it, it's about, if you want to look into the boundary transitions between any parameter that you are looking at. So all these three, let's say social and environmental, if you want to see the point where these two meet, right? If you have to bring something which is sustainable from both economic and social perspective, or economic and environmental perspective. So yeah, let me go back to that three thing that was there. Let me bring that here. So if you want to see transboundary sustainability, these would be these regions, right? But then, as we have already, by the inherent definition of sustainability, these don't make sense. They are not sustainable if you only look into two aspects of this. It's sustainable only when you take all of these three into consideration, and that's why even if you have something called transboundary sustainability, that is not part of the sustainable development, because that's not what you are formally describing it as. So I hope that was clear. Okay, one small correction. I don't know. I must have missed out. It says, which of this is one of the goals of sustainable development? Unfortunately, the word which one of this is not a goal, because no poverty, life below water, and reduced inequality are part of development goal. Reduced hunger is not a goal of sustainable development. For hunger also, you have zero hunger, not reduce. There shouldn't be any reduce hunger. There should be absolutely no hunger, just like no poverty. If I just will go back to the 21 agendas. So no poverties and zero hunger are sustainable development. So what the question originally was, which of these is not a part of sustainable development goal, and that answer was reduced hunger. So I just wanted to clarify that. For some reason, the not is not part of the question here. So just wanted to give that clarity. Yeah. So with that, we come to an end of today's session. If you have any doubt, any more doubt, please put in the chat box. If not, then we see each other in the next session. And thank you so much for being with me for so long.